Raphael awkwardly, but habitually, put his plastered leg aside, leaned on the windowsill and looked out into the street. Spring was raging outside. Dirty city snowdrifts were settling, shrinking, and flowing onto the road. The bright sun glared mercilessly, even through the unwashed window panes. Teenagers, sensing the warmth, had instantly thrown off their winter clothes and were walking down the street without hats, their light jackets open at the chest. Impossibly grimy cars cheerfully splashed dirty water on each other and on gawking passers-by. He glanced around to make sure none of his hospital room neighbours were present and quickly opened the window. Fresh, spring air rushed into the stuffy, heated room, intoxicating Raphael as he inhaled deeply. "Raphael?" Ben, a man well over 60, appeared instantly at the threshold, as if he'd been lying in ambush, waiting for this moment. "Started another hurricane in the ward again?" "I'm closing it, Ben," exclaimed Raphael, regretfully shutting the window. "Just ventilating a bit, it's stuffy." After spending a few more minutes of another endless day at the window, Raphael grabbed his crutches and waddled to his bed. He had been languishing in hospital confinement for 2 months now, though at least he could get out of bed and move around the ward with crutches. He had always worked as long as he could remember, never sitting still, and especially never lying on an uncomfortable bed, deciding whether his back or side ached more. He was sick to death of his mostly elderly wardmates, or cellmates, as they called themselves with attempted humour. He was fed up with their endless conversations about illnesses, fishing, and wayward grandchildren. The crossword puzzle magazine bored him. He didn't know half the words anyway. The sight of greyish soup or porridge only made him picture, with mocking clarity, a steak with golden potato wedges, or fresh pink shrimp, or anything else that made him hate the hospital food even more. Then the early, unexpectedly swift spring descended on the city, promising renewal, joy and freedom from snow, heavy clothes and cold. It called out to live joyfully, vibrantly, quickly. The man stared at the hospital ceiling, where he knew every crack and stain, closed his eyes, and half listened to another old man's story about catching carp with bread bait. Occasionally he'd glance at the clock, which seemed perpetually frozen. At age 30, experiencing his first hospital stay, Raphael Fisher reached a stunningly obvious conclusion. He hated all of this. All he could do was endure until his complex leg fracture healed enough for release. There was only one bright spot in this dreary existence that felt more like a plant's life than a man's. Or rather, not a spot, but a ray of light that broke through the endless hospital monotony. That ray was named Erin, a nurse in the trauma ward. There was nothing particularly special about her. She wasn't a beauty, didn't talk much, and avoided drawing attention to herself. Yet when she entered the ward, everything seemed brighter. You wanted to smile, throw away your crutches, run to her, sweep her up and spin her around. Erin worked mostly nights, and Raphael eagerly awaited evening when she would visit the ward, smile cheerfully, and call him for injections. On particularly lucky days, she'd come with a thermometer, or blood pressure cuff, or tend to someone's IV drip, allowing him to admire her through half-closed eyelids. Raphael was born and raised in an ordinary family, the second and last child of his parents after his sister Abigail, who was 5 years older. His parents, having met and married as students, had grown weary of each other over their years together. While the children were young, they maintained some semblance of family life, but by the time Raphael turned 14, he realized his parents were merely living together out of habit, having become strangers with no real interest in each other. Eventually his father left, yet his mother had little reason to complain. Melvin had left her their large apartment and car. He faithfully sent money for the children's support, paid for their education and extra activities, and continued to support his former wife financially. By the time Abigail finished university with an impractical degree, chosen mainly at her mother's insistence, Melvin's business was thriving, and he gave his daughter a modest but decent apartment. Abigail happily moved into her own place and largely ceased contact with her mother and brother. Raphael was an average student, concerned mainly with avoiding his mother's obvious disapproval. He spent time with friends and attended freestyle wrestling classes, not for athletic achievement, but to ensure he could stand up for himself in a fight if needed. At the start of 9th grade, he had a serious conversation with his father. "Well, what are you planning to do after graduation?" Melvin studied his son carefully. "I don't know, Dad. Haven't thought about it yet." Raphael casually dismissed the persistent question everyone kept asking. "Haven't thought about it, His father shook his head. "But you should start thinking. How about working at my firm? Do you even know what we do?" "Well, you seem to race cars," Raphael replied uncertainly, feeling ashamed. He really was a fool. His father was a good man, who had always helped him with money and never refused help or advice. And he, the only son, had never even asked what his father did for a living. "Racing cars," his father said mockingly, clearly hurt. "Listen, we carry cargo and transport cars. Understand? This is real work worthy of a man. You're a man, Raphael, and you have to earn your own living. You may be my only son, but you won't live off me. If you want money, I'll teach you how to earn it." To Raphael's credit, he had never expected his father to provide for him, unlike his sister, who had received an apartment from their father. A few months later, he started working for his father's transportation company. At first he did odd jobs, courier work, helping in the car repair shop, even shoveling snow at the base after heavy storms. Following his father's advice, he enrolled in driving school. There at last, he found his calling, something that captivated him completely. "Your Raphael was born to be behind the wheel," one of the driving instructors told Melvin with a laugh. "You know, it's in his blood." Raphael loved driving with a passion. Behind the wheel he felt confident, calm, and at ease. The car became his friend, a partner responsive to his slightest movements. He had an intuitive feel for any vehicle he drove, navigating complex road situations as easily as reading a book. By 19, Raphael Fisher was considered one of the region's best young racers. "Well, well," his father would grumble, hearing stories about high-speed races. "You can play Schumacher for a couple more years, but then what? Raphael, when will you get serious? I need professional drivers I can trust, and here's my own son just playing with cars." Melvin wasn't being entirely honest. He was proud of his son's achievements, though he showed it sparingly. Raphael himself understood he had reached his peak in sports and needed to think about his future. The solution was simple. At 25, Raphael was an excellent driver who couldn't imagine doing anything else. Naturally, he joined his father's company, spending several years transporting luxury cars across the country. Raphael worked diligently, sometimes staying in the cab for days. His hard work paid off. He bought his own apartment by 30. "What did you expect?" his father laughed. "That I'd hand it to you on a silver platter? No way. I've always said a real man earns everything himself." As time passed, Raphael gained experience and grew stronger. He dated women casually, living a straightforward, uncomplicated life. He maintained normal relations with his mother and sister, mostly by phone. His mother never forgave him for not pursuing higher education, mainly blaming her ex-husband. "You listened to your father all your life, and now you'll live as an ignoramus like him, wasting your life tinkering with dirty vehicles," she would scold during their meetings. She conveniently forgot that these dirty vehicles and her loser ex-husband had provided her a comfortable life, even after their divorce. About his sister, Raphael knew that Abigail had been married and divorced twice, constantly changed jobs, and remained perpetually dissatisfied. She had sold the apartment their father gave her, investing in a dubious venture that failed. This led her back to their mother's old apartment. Neither mother nor daughter was happy with the arrangement, but they had no choice. It was the last day of autumn. Raphael was on another job, spending almost 5 days transporting a massive excavator across the country. Despite his experience, he had never delivered such a vehicle. The trawl was unwieldy and difficult to handle. Being cautious with this monster, as Raphael nicknamed it, he covered less distance than planned and was running significantly behind schedule. His father kept calling on his cell phone, hurrying his son. "Raphael, how much longer are you going to drag yourself around?" His angry voice crackled through the phone. "I'm losing my patience. The customer urgently needs this excavator, and you're arranging a sightseeing tour on the way? What's wrong with you? I don't recognize you. You need to be there by tomorrow evening at the very latest, by the day after tomorrow morning." It had been pouring rain since morning, and for several days now the temperature had dropped sharply by evening, turning the roads into skating rinks. After talking to his father, Raphael looked doubtfully at the truck's wheels. "Well, it's not winter yet. I'll speed up," he decided. On an unfamiliar curve, the heavy vehicle skidded. Fortunately, it didn't collide with anyone. It simply flew off the highway, overturned, and died in the ditch. Raphael hit his head hard, lost consciousness, and came to only in the ambulance. His bruised head, arm, and side hurt, but none of that compared to the searing, blinding pain tearing through his right leg. "Hush, hush," said an elderly woman sitting next to the stretcher. "Lie still, don't move, or you'll worsen it. Your leg's in bad shape, boy. I'm used to seeing injuries, but even I was scared to look at it. At first, we weren't sure you'd get here. We could barely stop the bleeding." She said something else, and her soothing, quiet voice lulled him as he closed his eyes. "So, I had an accident, wrecked the truck and hurt myself. All because I rushed." The leg, shattered into pieces, took several hours to reassemble. Waking up from anesthesia after the operation, Raphael stared in horror at the huge white cast suspended above the bed by some complex contraption. Finally realizing it was his own leg, he covered his eyes and took a deep breath. "Oh, you're awake," cheerfully called out a short, stubby man, bouncing briskly around the hospital ward on a single crutch. "What a healthy sleep you've had, boy." "Hello," Raphael managed to pronounce at last. "Hello, hello. Though we've seen healthier folks," chuckled the man. "Well, newcomer, let's get acquainted, shall we? By the looks of it, you're here for a long time." "You think so?" Raphael said, glancing at his leg again. "I suppose so. For a long time. Probably at least a month." His answer was met with loud laughter. The man with the crutch turned to look at Raphael and added, "A month? You're an optimist. How about 2 to 3 months instead?" He replied with strange glee. "A month? That's a good one." 3 months? What are you talking about? It can't be." Horrified, Raphael shook his head stubbornly. To hell with this cheerful wag. What could he really know? He's just talking, pretending to be knowledgeable and experienced. It can't possibly take that long to heal. Raphael convinced himself that everything would be fine and calmed down. His peace of mind and hopes for a quick discharge were ruthlessly shattered during the first visit of his attending physician. "Well, young man," an elderly doctor with sleep-deprived red eyes looked at Raphael carefully. "How are you feeling?" "Fine, doctor, thank you," Raphael replied confidently, trying not to wince at the pain in his leg. Tell me, please, when will I be discharged?" The doctor studied him curiously, and a hint of a smile crossed his tired face. "Soon, young man, soon," he assured. "Not this New Year's Eve, but you'll definitely be home by the next one." "Doctor, I'm serious," pleaded Raphael. "You know, I'm completely serious too." The doctor suddenly frowned. "How many legs do you have now?" I don't understand, Doctor," Raphael muttered embarrassedly. "What don't you understand? How many legs do you have now?" "2. Raphael felt very foolish. "Yes, 2 whole ones. And in your case, that must be considered a great fortune. You're talking about discharge? With an injury like yours, young man, you should lie here for 3 months and be thankful you're alive at all, then spend just as long learning to walk again. Now, just lie there and think. You've got plenty of time, and I'll be treating you. Hopefully I'll finish before I go to retire." Laughing at his dubious joke, the doctor looked Raphael over once more and left the room. 6 months in sum. None of it made sense. Raphael wanted to scream, howl, swear, throw something heavy at the window, and most of all, break that damned huge plaster cocoon, which seemed to weigh a ton, and anchored him to the bed like a chain. As soon as he calmed down a bit, his father burst into the room, his hair dishevelled. "Raphael, son, I'm so sorry. I'm such an old fool." Melvin pulled at his shirt collar with trembling fingers and looked pleadingly at his son. "It's all my fault." "Dad, I'm sorry about the truck and excavator. It's probably beyond repair." "Damn that vehicle!" His father was nearly in tears. "Well, Dad, don't worry so much. What's wrong now?" Raphael suddenly found himself playing the consoler. "I'm alive, and the flesh will heal, as they say. Go on now. I'm tired." "Hello, gentlemen," came a soft, melodious voice. Raphael, struggling to break free from his gloomy thoughts, turned his head and opened his eyes. In the doorway stood a petite, slender figure in medical attire, her hair tucked under a cap and hands covered with rubber gloves. Though her body was completely concealed by the uniform, somehow this professional modesty was more alluring than any miniskirt or plunging neckline. The other patients clearly felt the same way. At the nurse's appearance, everyone perked up, smiled, and even tried to straighten their shoulders. "Erin, hello." "Hello, hello, our favourite nurse." "At last!" The ward residents shouted in unison. "Erin, we have a newcomer," called out a man with a crutch, whom Raphael had already known as Paul. "Yes, I know." She approached Raphael's bed with a slight smile. "Well, let's get acquainted. I'm Erin, the nurse." Raphael gritted his teeth and turned away. He knew he was being foolish and rude, but he couldn't help it. In those brief moments he had looked at her, he had noticed that Erin was young and beautiful, lively brown eyes, a delicate nose, a blonde strand of hair escaping from under her cap, graceful wrists. It all registered instantly in his mind. "Overwhelmed," came the whistling whisper of the ever-present Paul. "That's all right," she replied. "The first days are always the hardest. It'll get easier later." A few days later, he stopped acting like a silly child. He appreciated the care from all the ward nurses, but he couldn't deny that he looked forward to Erin's shifts, counting the days until her next duty. Whenever she appeared in the doorway, the ward seemed to brighten and expand as if by magic. The young woman would enter, smile, nod slightly, and looking around at everyone, deliver her familiar greeting. "Hello, men. How are you feeling today?" They were simple, routine words, similar to those spoken by other staff members, nurses on different shifts, doctors, anesthesiologists, and the kindly, elderly cleaning lady who resembled everyone's grandmother. Yet somehow only Erin's words made everyone want to smile back, even when fractures ached and spirits were low. "Oh, I envy you, Raphael. Youth is a powerful thing," elderly Ben, the ward's self-appointed fighter with airing in the ward, would say with a knowing wink after she left. "What do you mean?" Raphael would ask, puzzled. "What do I mean? You know exactly what I mean," the man Ben would snort. "That very thing." "Oh, nonsense," Raphael would shrug. "She's just a pretty girl with a gentle touch. She gives injections so skillfully you can barely feel them." Yes, injections, of course," the elderly man would continue, eyes twinkling slyly. Time, the best healer, passed, sometimes unbearably slowly, sometimes stretching to infinity, as one day replaced another. The first week was followed by the second and the third. December gave way to snowy and frosty January. Raphael's leg, though healing with difficulty, finally fused. At last came the day when he was allowed to get out of bed. Straightening to his full height, Raphael suddenly felt like a baby taking its first steps, and would have fallen if Erin hadn't been there. The girl quickly and deftly supported him. Despite her outward fragility and tenderness, she was surprisingly strong. When she ducked under his arm with a confident movement, putting her shoulders under for his support, he felt her strength. "Lean on me, don't be afraid," she said, sensing his uncertainty. "I've carried heavier than you. I'm strong. I'm a village girl," she added suddenly. "You're from the village, are you?" Raphael was sincerely surprised. "I would never have thought it." Erin, graceful and reserved, with delicate features on her pale face, didn't match his image of a village girl at all. In his mind, village girls were always stocky and rosy-cheeked with braided plaits. 2 endless months passed as his bones healed. Slowly the torn muscles recovered, and he began stepping carefully on his injured leg, waddling along the corridor with the help of crutches. At the end of February, the trauma surgeon who operated on his leg confidently stated, "Well, Raphael Fisher, we'll begin preparing you for discharge. Just don't jump for joy too much." Freedom at last. Raphael took a deep breath. How long he had waited for this moment. What joy that in just a few days he would be out of here. But somewhere, deep in his soul, stirred a feeling of loss. So he'll leave and never see Erin again? He would miss her smile, her quiet, gentle voice, the touch of her light, warm hands. "Erin, I'm about to be discharged," he announced when they met. "I already know," she answered calmly. "I'm very glad for you." "Erin," he suddenly became agitated. I want to thank you for everything, but most importantly, I understand." "I understand you, Raphael," she interrupted gently. "You don't need to thank me so much. It's my job." "Oh, right, of course." He felt uncomfortable for some reason. After this conversation, they never saw each other again. Raphael left the hospital and found himself under the care of his mother. The woman, who hadn't worried much about her son after he finished school and got involved with his abnormal father, as she put it, suddenly decided to unleash the full force of maternal care on him. "My boy, my sonny!" she exclaimed. "What on earth has happened to you?" "Mother," Raphael tried to stem the sudden flood of maternal love. "It happened a few months ago. It's all right now. Look." He leaned the crutch defiantly against the wall and took a few confident steps around the room. However, his mother's care and overprotection quickly became tiresome, and she left her son alone. He slowly returned to normal life, walking confidently despite his limp, meeting with friends, taking walks and breathing in the fresh air free of hospital odours, discussing work plans with his father. But no matter what he did, where he was, or what he thought about, he always felt a slight sadness, as if he had lost something critical, though he couldn't quite grasp what it was. Finally, he realised that he missed Erin. He wanted to see her, hear her voice, hold her hand, have her by his side. This revelation became so clear that it frightened him a little. Was he in love? With the nurse? With a woman who seemed indifferent to him? Unable to answer these questions, he arrived at the hospital at the end of her 24-hour shift. "But I swore to myself that I would never go near this building again." Raphael grinned to himself, sat down on a bench and waited. He was lucky. Within half an hour, he saw a familiar short figure coming out of the hospital door. Without noticing him, Erin wandered along the alley, smiling at her thoughts. "Erin, hello," he called softly. She flinched and turned towards him. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Raphael tried to joke, getting up from the bench. "And it's just me. And I'm almost not limping, see?" He took a few steps, showing her his progress. "You see, I'm almost ready to ask you to dance." He smiled, expecting her to match his joking tone as before. But instead, Erin stared at him silently, with her huge eyes, biting her lower lip. "Erin, aren't you happy to see me at all?" Raphael asked. She shook her head, and suddenly tears sprang from her eyes. She didn't sob or clam up, didn't wipe the tears away or hide her face. She simply stood there, crying, with her eyes wide open. "Erin? Erin," Raphael mumbled confusedly, at first frightened like any man by a woman's tears, then suddenly moved by an impulse, stepped toward her, embraced her shoulders, and pressed his face against her light, smooth hair that cast a golden glow. "Erin, I love you," he whispered. Suddenly she pushed him away, wiped her face angrily, and shook her head. "No, don't you dare! Stop it! Do you hear me?" She stomped her foot on the ground. "This will never happen. You hear me? And don't you dare follow me." She strode quickly down the alley toward the bus stop, and he, stunned either by her unexpected reaction or by her equally unexpected furious rebuff, froze in a kind of stupor and sank back onto the bench. Why did she react like that? Is this how women are supposed to respond to a declaration of love? Maybe she didn't believe me, because I don't fully believe myself, to be honest. If she doesn't care for me at all, what do these sudden tears mean? Oh, God, who can understand these women? Raphael whispered, wrapping his arms around his head. The next day he was sitting on a bench near the hospital entrance again. Seeing his figure, Erin slowed her step, but after a moment's thought, she straightened up resolutely and walked toward him. "I need to have a serious talk with you, Raphael," she said, pronouncing his name with obvious difficulty. Erin stood a few steps away from him, while he remained seated, hesitant to move, feeling strangely helpless. "Erin," he began, but she firmly interrupted him. "What you said to me yesterday, it's just—" "It's true," Raphael said softly. "It's the truth. I love you." "No!" Erin cried out. "No, it's not true. It's nonsense. It can't be. Don't you understand?" "But why, Erin?" He jumped up from the bench, forgetting his limp, and stepped closer to her. "Because I can't be with you, Raphael. I can't. Don't you understand?" She suddenly switched to the familiar form, whispering through tears. "I can't be with you. Don't torment me or yourself, I beg you." She embraced him briefly, pressing herself against his chest, then resolutely pushed him away. "You won't get rid of me that easily." Raphael grabbed her arm firmly. "I love you, and you, pardon my confidence, seemed to be attracted to me too, so what's the problem? Why can't we be together?" Because you don't know anything about me, she almost shouted. Passers-by were turning to look, and several curious onlookers had gathered on the hospital's main entrance porch. Then tell me about yourself, and we'll decide together what we can and can't do, Raphael suggested simply. Erin was born and raised in the village, not much different from her peers, except for being prettier and smarter than most girls. She was perky, cheerful, excelled in school and was a natural leader. At dances, she never lacked dance partners or secret admirers. "Well, Erin won't stay single for long," her grandmother would laugh, shooing away yet another pimply-faced suitor from their gate. "Listen here," her mother would warn her with a stern face. A perpetually dissatisfied, grumpy woman who seemed to have forgotten feelings like joy, hope and love. "If you get pregnant, I'll throw you out. I won't tolerate such shame." "Who's talking?" Erin's grandmother unexpectedly retorted one day to her daughter's threat. "I put up with you, didn't I? Though I could have thrown you out too." Erin listened to their cryptic conversation in amazement, yet it didn't take much wisdom to understand their meaning. She had never known her father. Clearly her mother was trying to prevent Erin from repeating her fate. Realizing this, she burst out indignantly. "How can you think of me like that, Mother? How could you imagine I'd be so careless? Never!" By 17, Erin had truly blossomed. Golden blonde hair fell loosely on her shoulders, and though thick bangs covered half her face, they couldn't hide her large brown eyes with thick lashes, neat upturned nose and slightly full lips. Petite and graceful, she moved with a light, almost dancing step, usually smiling at her own thoughts, drawing lingering glances from passers-by. No one was surprised when Erin caught the attention of Doug, the most popular boy in school, the soccer team captain and acknowledged school heartthrob. He was a year older than Erin, and quite intelligent. At first, as usual, Erin ignored his attention, but truthfully, she had little chance of resisting. She couldn't help but notice the envious looks from other girls at school and on the street. Doug was attentive, gentle, and said exactly the words no woman's heart could resist, let alone that of a romantic, unsophisticated girl. At his graduation party, to his classmates' chagrin, Doug brought Erin and made it clear that she was his girlfriend. Erin was in seventh heaven, feeling mature, beautiful, and most importantly, desired. The feeling intoxicated her, making her dizzy with joy. What happened next was the same story that had happened to millions of young women worldwide. Erin, though stunned and frightened by what had occurred, was nevertheless happy, especially since Doug passionately assured her that she was the most beautiful girl in the world, that he loved her and would never leave her. Doug's never lasted only a few months. In fall, he left for university in the city, and Erin discovered she was pregnant. Bewilderment gave way to speculation, then to fear, and the lovesick high school girl rushed to call her beloved. "Are you crazy?" she heard. "Are you stupid? Don't you know what they do in cases like this? And anyway, why should I believe that this child is mine?" "Whose?" whispered Erin, barely moving her lips. "How should I know? You know best," came the reply. "You're a popular girl, so you're probably hanging around with someone." Erin silently hung up. Like a hunted animal waiting for a blow, Erin, already thin, had withered to a shadow in a month. "Well, tell me," said the grandmother, who had raised Erin and essentially replaced her ever-busy mother, as she sank heavily into the chair opposite her granddaughter. The girl looked fearfully at the elderly woman and pressed her eyes into the tablecloth. "Well, tell me or don't. Everything is clear, anyway," sighed the grandmother, propping her head with her palm. "Well, what are you going to do, Erin Hallisey?" "I don't know," whispered Erin. "And when you were with that worthless fool, did you know?" The elderly woman angrily slapped her palm on the table and sighed deeply again. Yes. What are you going to do next? The same thing everyone else does nowadays. Get rid of it? Of whom? Erin looked at her grandmother with eyes round with horror. The baby, your baby. Who else? Replied grandmother angrily. Erin protectively wrapped her arms around her belly, as if shielding it from all the world's dangers, and shook her head. That's right, girl. It's a sin to start your life with such terrible action. So, Doug, the first boy of the school, proved himself a scoundrel, and Erin became a 19-year-old single mother. She gave birth to a boy without complications and named him Mike. When her son was 4 years old, his grandmother suddenly announced, Get ready to go to town. Come on. There's no sense sitting here all your life. Go get a profession. See the world. Live differently. Nothing will happen to your Mike, she grumbled, watching how Erin fearfully clutched her son. I'm still of sound mind and strong enough to look after the boy. After much persuasion and threats to curse her, the grandmother finally managed to push Erin, as she put it, out into the world. Erin went to town. She graduated from nursing school and started working at a hospital. Mike grew into a healthy, clever boy, and his great-grandmother, by her own account, felt younger beside him, though the pranks of the inexhaustibly attentive child seemed, paradoxically, to steal years from her life. Erin visited her son and grandmother at every opportunity, dreaming that the hospital in her native village would finally be renovated so she could work and live at home, close to her loved ones. Everything was straightforward until a young man with a severe leg fracture appeared in their ward. Erin, now an experienced nurse, could see that he suffered not just from physical pain, but from the powerlessness, helplessness, and small humiliations that a strong, healthy, independent man inevitably experiences in such a situation. At first she felt only professional compassion and a desire to help, but gradually she realized that she was drawn to this dark-haired, thoughtful young man, whose face would occasionally light up with an endearing, almost boyish smile. Erin, accustomed to both genuine and feigned attention from male patients, found herself cherishing his attentive, serious gaze and his measured words. She suddenly realized that her capacity for love had awakened again, the very part of herself she had locked away as punishment after Doug's betrayal. Fortunately, it ended before it truly began. Raphael recovered and was discharged. Their farewell was awkward. He seemed to struggle with important words left unsaid, and she didn't help him find them, afraid of what might be spoken. Well, it's good that he's finally recovered, she thought. It wouldn't have worked out anyway. I simply have no right to all this. I have no right. She was beginning to calm down and thought less about the dark-haired patient. That's why her heart nearly stopped when she suddenly heard a familiar voice on her way to work. She couldn't take it any more and burst into tears. She hadn't cried like this since childhood, since the day when, as a 10-year-old girl, the neighbour boys had stolen her favourite doll and let it float away downriver. The same feeling of resentment, loss and helplessness squeezed her heart now, as it had when she'd cried over her forever lost toy. He stepped toward her, pulled her close and whispered softly, "I love you." She pushed him away and ran, feeling his confused, hurt, perplexed gaze following her. When her hysteria passed, she told herself, "So be it. If he's offended, that's better. Better he be offended and dismiss me than find out about me, that and he's a wonderful man, and I have no right to spoil his life." When she saw his figure on the bench in the hospital square the next day, she wasn't entirely surprised. I must talk to him seriously, explain everything, tell him the truth, make him understand that it's not about him at all. It's about her. But as soon as she approached him, all those proper, honest and clear words became tangled in her throat. She tried to explain, but somehow found herself mumbling simple, tender words full of bittersweet sadness and love. Now they sat on an old shabby bench holding hands. He was gently stroking her head and whispering in her ear, while she smiled happily through her tears. "Silly girl," he murmured. "I love you, all of you, with your past, present and future. Though, about the future, I hope it won't be yours or mine, but ours, together." "Raphael, but I have Mike. People will say she's settled down, put someone else's child on his shoulders." "Let them talk. What difference does it make? Who knows who got the better deal here? I love you and want to be with you. Everything else is completely unimportant." Raphael was absolutely happy and wanted the whole world to know it. His father, upon hearing the news, scratched his head thoughtfully and said, "Well, Raphael, this is unexpected, but you know what? I'm happy for you. Really. I suppose this is exactly how it should be. If you fell in love with a girl, then grab her and live happily ever after. And honestly, as a man, I understand you perfectly." Melvin squinted slyly. "I saw her several times when I visited you in the hospital. Your Erin, she's very... well, you know what I mean. She's a real woman. Congratulations, and be happy." But with Raphael's mother, naturally things went quite differently. Upon learning that her son had involved with, as she put it, a penniless village nurse with a small child, she was horrified. "You've lost your mind." His mother stood before Raphael, her eyes flashing angrily, eyebrows arched dramatically, as she clasped her hands in a gesture both threatening and pleading. "You've gone completely mad. I knew your wretched father was a bad influence, and the fact that he nearly drove you to your grave and made you an invalid only proves my point. But that you would become utterly deranged, I could never have guessed." "Mum," Raphael sighed wearily, interrupting her tirade. "First, father isn't a wretched man, and what happened to me wasn't his fault. That's life, mother. Second, I'm not an invalid. And third, there's nothing wrong with me, physically or mentally." "Oh, really? You certainly don't seem right. A 30-year-old man in his right mind would never do such a thing, Raphael. My son." Seeing that shouting wasn't working, the mother clearly decided to change tactics. "Please, listen to me. This passion of yours, she's not a girl. If she already has a child, that means she's already, well—" "Mum," Raphael grinned, "you're talking about the child as if it's some kind of disease. Erin has a son. So what?" "So what? Are you really this stupid? You're going to burden yourself with someone else's child?" "He's not someone else's child, Mum. He's the son of the woman I love, which means he's not a stranger to me." "Why don't you just adopt him, then?" she exclaimed. "I might just do that. Actually, I hadn't thought of it. Thanks for the idea." Raphael smiled, trying to make peace with his mother, but judging by her expression, she remained unmoved. "She's a country girl. Who knows what kind of family she comes from? And she herself, clearly uneducated, doesn't show any intelligence. She's just using her pretty face and figure to catch men." "That's enough, Mum." Raphael stood up firmly from his chair. "I agreed to talk out of respect. I wanted to explain everything civilly, but I won't listen to you insult Erin. Mum, I love her and want to spend my life with her. I'll be happy if you understand and accept that, and if you don't, well." Erin and Raphael lived together in his apartment. They were so content with each other that their world seemed complete, full of love and harmony. Soon Raphael offered Erin to move Mike to them, and the woman agreed with happiness. The boy quickly adapted and formed a bond with the man, who matched the child's enthusiasm for fun. Raphael many times offered Erin to marry him, but the woman was still afraid. "Let's wait a little longer," Erin always answered. "Wait for what?" he raged. "How long should we wait, Erin? I don't understand. Don't you believe me? Are you testing me?" "No, Raphael, no. What are you saying?" She looked at him fearfully and kissed him on the cheek. "I don't doubt you, not at all. I'm just afraid of something. I don't know what. Forgive your village fool. You see, it's all too unreal, too good. Sometimes I feel like I'm dreaming. I'll wake up and you'll be gone. Let me get used to my happiness." Soon after a few months of getting used to happiness, Erin discovered she was pregnant. In a due date, they had a baby girl, whom they named Polly. "That's it," Raphael exulted. "Now you're definitely not getting away from me. You'll have to marry me. I have a trip to the North Country in a few weeks, truck delivery. I'll come back and we'll get married. No refusal accepted. Erin, I've always dreamed of a bride in a white dress, like a princess." But Raphael did not return from that trip. He died when a car from the oncoming lane crashed into his car at full speed. How Erin endured it all. The news of his death, farewells, funerals, attempts to live without him. She barely remembered. Little Polly pulled her out of hopeless despair, demanding and noisy, unconcerned with who lived or died, or why Mummy cried all the time. Polly grew up, got sick, needed sleep, walks and play, leaving Erin little time to feel sorry for herself. A few months after Raphael's death, there was a phone call. "Erin Hallisey?" An unfamiliar voice asked. "This is a notary," he stated, pronouncing a long, complicated surname she couldn't quite catch. "I'm calling to formally notify you that there is a will in your favour." "A will?" Erin asked in amazement. "You must be mistaken." "Tell me, do you know Raphael Fisher?" The stranger's dry question, speaking Raphael's name, sent a piercing pain through her. "Yes, I do. Did," she barely managed. "Then there's no mistake," the voice stated. "I have Raphael Fisher's will in favour of Erin Hallisey, concerning his property. I ask you to come to my office tomorrow to have it read." She sat on a park bench and stared at her already silent phone. Raphael, so young, strong, full of hopes and plans, planning to live for 100 years and 3 more, left a will. It wouldn't sink in. Why? It's crazy. Could this be someone's cruel joke? She looked at the piece of paper with the notary's address, searched for it online, found the official website and wrote down a phone number. She called back and, stumbling over her words, asked to confirm the appointment. "Yes, of course, Erin Hallisey. We expect you tomorrow by 9 o'clock, said an official female voice. "Don't forget your passport, please." Erin walked toward the house and, suddenly feeling weak, sat down at a table in a small summer cafe under an umbrella. It was a mild summer evening, and her seat, cosily hidden from other tables by a small green fence, was perfect for having a cup of coffee and gathering her thoughts. She savoured the coffee's aroma. "I found out everything. Her name is Hallisey. She's living in the apartment completely illegally. I wrote that in a statement to the district police officer," came a soft female voice from nearby. Hearing her last name, Erin jerked her hand in surprise and spilled her hot coffee. She mechanically wiped her hand with a napkin while continuing to listen to the startling conversation. "They never even registered the marriage. Do you realise what that means? The woman has no legal right to Raphael's apartment. We can easily evict her with all her children and belongings because we're the legal heirs." Who's we? The invisible interlocutor asked curtly. We are the direct relatives, replied the woman. I consulted a lawyer, by the way. Everything's accurate. We're taking the apartment and you're moving in. Are you so sure about that, Mum? Yes, Abigail, I'm sure. And I'm also sure that neither you nor I want to live under each other's noses until we're old. Isn't that right, daughter? That's right, replied the daughter mockingly, and after a pause added, And this one, what's her name? Erin, I think. What makes you think she won't object? The woman's voice belonged to Abigail, who Erin finally realised was Raphael's sister. Her companion was his mother, who had never wished to meet her or her newborn granddaughter. She won't object, said Erin, emerging from behind the green partition. I only wanted to finally make your acquaintance. I'm Erin Hallisey. I loved your son and brother deeply. She struggled to pronounce the words. And I always will. It doesn't matter that he's no longer with me. I still have Polly, his daughter, and his mirror image. And you have nothing else, well, except for the apartment, of course. Goodbye. She walked out of the cafe with her head held high, resisting the urge to look back at these people, so close to her, by fate, yet infinitely distant strangers. Erin and Polly left for the village. A few days later, Melvin burst in on them, characteristically dishevelled, noisy and resolute. Following him into the old house came a man in a formal dark suit and tie. It was the notary who had called Erin. He had brought her Raphael's will, which would make her the owner of all his possessions. My boy was a good man, and chose the best woman in the world for himself. Just know I will always look out for you and my granddaughter. Yes, my dear son is not with us, but his loved ones are, and it is my job now as a father and grandfather to take care of you. The apartment is rightfully yours, like the rest of his estate. Come back and be happy, girl, Melvin whispered in her ear as they said their goodbyes.